This is a true story. A story that begins in a small house. Its location? Unknown. There, inside that small house, lived a boy. And upon one cold morning, that boy awoke with the most peculiar ailment. That boy's right leg had grown. Yes, just his right leg. You see, he was quite shocked by this. His right leg noticeably now longer than the left. So, he shouted for his father, who rushed to his aid. When he saw his boy's elongated right leg, he cried in horror. Not knowing what to do about this strange occurrence, the father called the doctor, who just so happened to be his dear brother. The doctor, needless to say, was in total disbelief at the situation. He had to get there with utmost haste, but as the doctor was getting dressed, his wife shouted from their living room one truly worrisome word. Snake! The doctor sprinted to the living room to find his wife in battle with a large cobra, whose green scales was a clear sign of danger. But what was worse than the threatening animal in their home was the shards of his now gone grandmother's priceless vase on the floor. The doctor had received the bejeweled vase upon his grandmother's passing, and that mysterious vase was the subject of the only handwritten note in the whole will. It went a little something like this.
The ancient vase which is to be found in my study goes to my daughter of a grandson who must never break the vase, for such a tragedy would ensure the wrath of an ancient pharaoh's curse.
The doctor never believed in no such thing as curses. Curses were not real, but seeing the vase in a million billion pieces upon his floor did fill him with certain dread. His thoughts were interrupted by the hissing of the cobra-like snake, and the doctor swiftly neutralized the wild creature with a kick. This choice of action greatly upset the doctor's wife, for you see, she had quite the love for snakes, going back to her very own childhood pet, an equally green cobra named Morris. Morris was a harmless fellow who the wife cherished greatly. Later on in her life, she would be an activist for all kinds of charities specializing in exotic wildlife. And it was such a charity she met the ominous cloaked man. It was a stormy night. She clearly could recall. The wife had stayed late at the animal shelter she had been volunteering at. They rehoused tropical birds of all kinds. Her favorite was the lime green cockatiel nicknamed Champ. The green feathers were quite a match to her own old pet Morris, who was a snake, if you recall. But nevertheless, that stormy night, as she read the paper behind the counter, a rap tap and tap and a tap was heard. If the goal of the sound was to gain her attention, then that noise had accomplished just so. She looked up to the front door, and behind the glass stood an ominous cloaked man, the black cloak flailing wildly in the wind of the storm, only held tight onto the frame of the figure by two solemn buttons. The man's face was covered by a black mask, and no hair was visible, for a large dark fedora kept such details out of view. The wife was perplexed by this cloaked man with ominous undertones, but the man simply took out a red envelope and taped it stuck to the glass door. What was written in that envelope is a message the wife had decided that very night was to be taken to her grave. The wife's aging mother often thought about that cloaked man too, which her daughter told her of all those years ago. The mother at this moment was sat by her kitchen table, enjoying the finest breakfast. She had sworn ever since her youth to only ever allow time to the most delectable of breakfasts, and this one was just that, an egg with salt, and a damn vibrant glass of apple juice. Retirement for her was the reward she has always dreamed her twilight years out to be, which is why it was oh so strange that as she enjoyed this quality moment, she heard a laugh. No, more of a cackle, an evil cackle. Something about its tone was without a doubt malicious and spiritually cruel. The old mother was not going to be intimidated in her own house during her fine breakfast, so she reached across the kitchen table, past the plated egg, past the unlit candle, past today's newspaper, until finally reaching her loaded revolver. She cocked it and stood up with a firm grasp around the weapon, her finger ever so shaking around the interior ring of the trigger. Steadily, the now armed mother, whose age was not to keep her down, stepped towards the cackle. It was coming from the basement door. She threw the thin, rickety door open, aimed her revolver right at the gleefully perverse corpse come alive that stood there with maggots in its wide, foul, smiling mouth, and unloaded the whole revolving chamber into him. The driver of the black SUV sharply turned to his right at the sound of gunshots. The man in charge beside him waved it off.
None of our damn business, pal.
The three men lowered the semi-automatic rifles. Whatever was going on in that house was in fact none of their damn business. These boys' business was frankly more important than we could truly fathom. On paper, it was a walk in the park. Get to the park, walk in it, locate the man with the briefcase, and then retrieve it at any cost. Just one left turn at the end of the block, and the park would be in sight. But little did they know, a crazed stampede of horses were to interrupt their high-stakes mission. The man in the park had not accounted for such a thing to happen. I mean, how could you? But he heard the hundreds of horses gallop through the neighborhood, catching glimpses of them through the trees. He clenched the briefcase tightly. The boys were to be there any minute, he was told. But as the minutes passed, and the horses along with it, he knew that they must have been stopped by the hooligan horse mob. Against his own orders, the briefcase man walked with worry in his steps out of the park and turned right down the road where the horses had gone. He saw the wreckage of the black SUV. Fire and smoke filled the once serene neighborhood. He took one gulp.
This was not the plan.
The gardener heard the strange man out in the middle of the road say. In his hand was a briefcase with a sticker of Paddington, the bear, from those motion pictures by the same name. The gardener had never ever seen these features, but swore to one day do so. Maybe today, after she had finished up the client's roses. Yellow roses were quite a delightful sight, the gardener thought when she was told about the job. You usually get unruly weeds to rip out, but to work with some classy roses of a yellow, almost orange color sounded simply delightful. But the client had turned out to be everything but classy. A cruel, cruel woman. This client was quoted once as saying,
"All who enjoy their living are not living a worthy life. Torture is what makes the world go round. And funny that I found."
What a real bastard, this client. And contrary to their own code, the client had never worked an honest day's shift in their misery-causing life, born into generations upon generations of wealth, all made in morally detestable business ventures. The client's cynical view was only to serve themselves. This is why the gardener had no regrets when she cut the client's head clean off with a garden shears. Murder is illegal, decapitation too, but could you blame the gardener? Well, the police did anyway. The officer who arrested the gardener had come to investigate a call regarding haunting gunshots heard in the neighborhood, but was delayed by a rogue horde of horses who galloped through the streets. When the officer drove down the wrecked neighborhood, a basketball-sized thing flew right onto the hood the officer's police cruiser. He screeched to a halt and jumped out. The thing rolled around on the ground and the officer threw up as soon as he realized that it was the client's decapitated head. The gardener had clipped it off with such force it flew right out the second-story window and down onto, unfortunately, the officer's car. The arrest was swift and without protest. The gardener was put on death row and sent to the electric chair in no time. But some say that the gardener's huge hedge clippers can still be heard snipping in the night outside the homes whose lawns are egregiously unruly. But that is only a ghost story. The story I told you is real. All of this happened, you see. It really did. How do I know? I know, for I am that boy whose right leg grew. Good night.